and program funding opportunities. We commit to increasing outreach and participation by disadvantaged communities, to increasing diversity and participation at CEC proceedings, and increasing diversity in employment and promotional opportunities. Next slide, please. Our commitment to diversity also includes fairness in funding, accessibility to all Californians, and inclusion. Our solicitations are open to businesses big or small. And our funding efforts help with job creation, a diversity of new and innovative ideas, and support of diverse needs in a broad spectrum of communities throughout our great state. Next slide. The CEC is committed to ensuring that the Clean Transportation Program reflects the rich and diverse characteristics of California and its people. So if you can take some time to email us the following information: your name, your company, how you heard about this workshop, and whether your company is in Northern, Central, or Southern California. And all of that information can be emailed to myself at katie.herder@energy.ca.gov or to alexander.wan@energy.ca.gov. Next slide, please. So we hope to get 100% participation in this survey, and we plan to reach out to participants in order to get full participation. So if you've logged in and you're listening, please do email us this information. If you're representing a business that's a small business, a disabled veteran, woman-owned business, LGBT-owned business, or a minority-owned business, please let us know that as well in your email. And there'll be no priority points given for any of these businesses. This information will be used for metrics only. And when you do email us, please list the webinar title in the subject or body of your email, MD/HD, Zeb and Zeb Infrastructure Blueprints and Block Grant. And this information that you supply will be anonymous, so please feel free to send us that information. Next slide, please. Assembly Bill 8 extended the Alternative and Renewable Fuel and Vehicle Technology Program, or the ARFVTP, funding through January 1st of 2024. The ARFVTP has now been renamed the Clean Transportation Program. This program receives up to $100 million per year to be used to transform California's transportation market into a diverse collection of alternative fuels and technologies and reduce California's dependence on petroleum. And next slide, please. And also to develop and deploy innovative technologies that transform California's fuel and vehicle types to help attain the state's climate change policies. Complementary goals include improvement to California's air quality, investments in low-income and disadvantaged communities, promotion of economic development, an increase in alternative fuel use, and reduction of petroleum dependence. Next slide, please. From fiscal year 2018 through 2019, we have $17.5 million available, plus $6 million available under the EV charging infrastructure category. And for fiscal year 2019 through 2020, we have an additional $30 million available. Next slide, please. This slide shows all of our current draft solicitations and proposed funding allocations. We currently have $53.5 million available and up to $50 million in funds that may become available in the next fiscal year. And that will be subject to future appropriations and the Clean Transportation Program Investment Plan funding allocations. Next slide, please. So let's go ahead and talk about the first solicitation, blueprints for medium and heavy duty Zebs and Zeb infrastructure. Next slide. These blueprints must identify the actions and milestones needed for medium duty and heavy duty infrastructure implementation for EV charging or hydrogen refueling. They may include a regional focus on connecting corridors. They may be used in conjunction with utility funding programs, for example, PG&E's EV Fleet Program and Southern California Edison's Charge Ready Program. And with the completion of a successful Zeb blueprint, applicants may be eligible for future infrastructure funding. Next slide. So there's a total of $3 million available for awards for this solicitation. Projects are eligible for up to 100% of the total project cost, or $200,000, whichever is less. And funds must be used to develop or expand on a medium-duty or heavy-duty ZEV blueprint planning document. And that $3 million that's available for award under the solicitation, the CEC at its sole discretion reserves the right to increase or decrease the amount of funds available. Next slide, please. Application is open to all public and private entities, as described in the previous slide. Eligible entities must have in the development, planning, permitting, or oversight of medium-duty, heavy-duty ZEVs and/or ZEV infrastructure. All projects must be located in California. And for this concept, only one application may be submitted per applicant. Next slide, please. Okay, so let's walk through the project requirements. Minimum requirements are as follows. The blueprint must be implementable. It may not be duplicative of any previous planning efforts funded through the CEC, but it may build upon a previous project. It must identify charging and/or fueling requirements for medium-duty, heavy-duty vehicles. Considerations based on a community needs assessment. Next slide. So let's get a little more in depth with the requirements. The blueprint must identify milestones needed for implementation. It must recognize risks and uncertainties in implementation, for instance, in design, permitting, and financing. And it must provide analysis of the combination of technologies and systems that potentially offer the best mix of economic, environment, and technical performance specific to the region. Next slide. The blueprint must document the actions and steps already adopted by the local jurisdiction and discuss the impact of those actions or steps on the development of ZEV infrastructure. It must identify needs for improving future planning activities, such as analytical tools, software applications, etc. And it must identify tasks or areas of responsibility required of project partners and stakeholder groups that will lead to development of a replicable approach for other fleets, ports, or regions, etc. Next slide. The blueprint should address how the community will capture lessons learned and best practices. It must develop an outreach strategy tailored to the local community, supported by education and outreach materials appropriate for potentially affected residents in the languages needed for that community, and work with community colleges, community-based and community leaders to develop workforce development strategies that enable training, education, and readiness for the local community workforce. Next slide. The blueprint should also summarize the types of jobs that will be created in the community. It should identify goals to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, criteria air pollutants, and toxic air contaminants for the region, emitters at the local level that would need to be targeted, and address how the project would impact the grid and potential load management aspects. Next slide, please. The blueprint identifies that would accrue to disadvantaged communities, or DACs, and for the purposes of this draft solicitation, are defined as communities scoring in the top 25th percentile according to the most recent Cal EnviroScreen version 3.0, and that tool is available at the link provided there. More information about disadvantaged communities can be found at the OEHA website, and that link is also provided. Match share requirement. Projects are eligible for up to 1% of the total project costs, or $200,000, whichever is less. Next slide. Applications must pass both the administrative and technical screening. So the application must be complete and include a signature from an authorized individual. And technical screening criteria will be pass-fail. A list of the technical screening criteria will be shown in later slides. And projects will be funded on a first-come, first-served basis, beginning on the open application date and ending when all funds are exhausted. Again, this is a draft solicitation this is proposed, and we're looking for feedback from you. Next slide, please. The results will be released through a published Notice of Proposed Awards, or NOPA. The Energy Commission will then finalize the agreement documents and present the agreement at a business meeting for approval. Okay, again, I just want to emphasize that this is a draft solicitation. The proposed concept is presented here in part to solicit feedback from stakeholders, and all questions and comments will be seriously considered regarding all aspects of this proposed solicitation. So currently this is the scoring criteria that we plan to use. The application must be an eligible, the applicant must be an eligible applicant, project must be an eligible project, and the application must provide a separate activity description sheet, and the activity description sheet should include the project goals, the quantitative and measurable objectives to be achieved, and how the project will support market adoption of zero-emission medium-duty and heavy-duty vehicles. That activity description sheet must also demonstrate how the project will benefit priority populations and DACs, and those links were provided on a previous screen if you need to learn what a DAC is and whether or not you qualify. Next slide, please. The activity description sheet should also provide a description of how the funds will be used and must demonstrate why the requested funds are appropriate for the proposed activity. And then a project team worksheet must be complete and must demonstrate the project collaboration and coordination. If an existing Zev readiness plan or blueprint exists, applicants must demonstrate that the proposed project expands upon and is coordinated and consistent with the existing plan. Next slide. Finally, the scope of work must be complete. The budget must be complete. The schedule of products and due dates must be complete, and it should include letters of support and commitment. Next slide, please. So after scoring is completed, the proposals are ranked and recommended for funding according to the overall final score of pass-fail. The results will be released of proposed awards, or NOPA, and the Energy Commission will then finalize the agreement documents and present them at a business meeting for approval. Again, this is a proposed solicitation, and applications are not being accepted at this time. After solicitation release, applications will have an application acceptance date where applications will begin to be accepted and scored based on a first-come, first-served basis. So today is our pre-solicitation workshop. The solicitation release is planned for May, and applications will begin to be accepted in July. And again, we'll start on that acceptance date, the application acceptance date, and we'll score, pass, fail, and make awards until funds are exhausted. The anticipated notice of proposed awards posting is anticipated to be July, and the anticipated CEC business meeting approval set for September, and agreement execution we're expecting around October and ongoing. Next slide, please. Okay, so that concludes my presentation. And what we're looking for from you, you can use your chat box or submit questions or comments to the docket. What questions do we still want answered? Please give us your feedback. And now I'll go ahead and pass the presentation on to my colleague, Alex Wan. Alex?
Hi, everyone. My name is Alex Wan. I'm an Associate Energy Specialist in the Freight and Transit Unit. As my colleague Katie mentioned, I'll be going over the block grant for medium and heavy-duty zero-emission vehicle infrastructure incentive projects. The purpose of this block grant is to seek a grant recipient to design and implement up to $50 million in grant funds. These funds are to be used for various zero-emission, medium, and heavy-duty electric vehicle charging or hydrogen refueling infrastructure incentive projects throughout California. Projects funded under this solicitation may complement medium and heavy-duty vehicles awarded under the California Air Resources Board's HVIP program. As I mentioned in my last slide, up to $50 million may be available for this grant. However, this amount is subject to future appropriations as well as Clean Transportation Program investment plan funding allocations. The CEC also reserves the right to increase or decrease the total amount of funding available under this solicitation. There's no match funding requirements for this proposed solicitation, but there are cost limits. Administrative costs, which include all costs incurred under this agreement, excluding website development costs or funds delivered to a third party, are limited to 7% of available funds. Applicants will be evaluated in part on their ability to minimize and control administrative costs. In addition, recipients may not spend more than $1 million on website development activities. All not-for-profit technology entities located in California may apply for grant funds under this proposed solicitation. A not-for-profit technology entity is defined as an entity filing as and operating under the Internal Revenue Services requirements of a 501c3 corporation and organized to advance transportation technologies. All corporations, limited partnerships, limited liability partnerships, and limited liability corporations that conduct intrastate business and apply for this proposed solicitation must be registered and in good standing with the California Secretary of State's office. So proprietors using a fictitious business name must be registered with the appropriate county and provide evidence of registration to the CEC prior to their project being recommended for approval at a business meeting. All applicants are eligible to submit only one application under this proposed solicitation. There are several project requirements for this proposed solicitation. First, the block grant recipient will be responsible for identifying medium and heavy-duty zero-emission charging and hydrogen refilling infrastructure incentive projects and implementing these projects. These projects may be based on the zero-emission fuel type, for example, electric or hydrogen, the site location requirements, for example, transit, municipal, regional warehouse, or small business fleets, the geographical region, for example, cities, counties, or regions, the location requirements, for instance, corridors, depots, or disadvantaged communities, considerations based off a community needs assessment, and incentive vouchers received or obtained for zero-emission medium and heavy-duty vehicles. In addition, recipients must ensure that proposed projects include the following information: the types of medium and heavy-duty electric charging or hydrogen refilling eligible, for example, types of chargers and the type of stations, the minimum technical requirements of the charging or refilling equipment, for example, the equipment specifications or warranty requirements, the types of incentive structure, for example, whether this is a voucher or rebate, the appropriate vehicle grid integration standards, interoperable EV infrastructure, or other methods for enhancing grid reliability, providing data to utilities to predict charging behavior and associate impacts on the grids, equity evaluation criteria based on the community needs assessment and feedback from local residents, the quantity of stations and chargers being targeted, the incentive amount per charger and per station, and the total amount of funding required to complete the proposed project. Recipients need to develop simple and user-friendly application documents for each project. Recipients should also develop an outreach and advertisement plan for each approved project and conduct outreach in accordance with this plan, which must be approved by the Commission Agreement Manager. This plan needs to include appropriate outreach materials, and materials must be in the languages needed by the community. Moreover, recipients must engage regional community-based organizations, community leaders, California's Native American tribes, and potentially affected local residents in the planning process and provide education on the benefits of zero-emission vehicle transportation. Recipients also need to develop user-friendly and publicly accessible web pages. These web pages shall, at a minimum, include online application forms, the ability to submit online incentive applications, applicable documents and forms, including resource documents, the ability to track total funds, both available and expended in real time, and the ability to provide information on disbursements, such as a heat map representation of where the funds are being dispersed. You should also collect data on incentive recipients from the applications and submit this data to the Commission Agreement Manager. This data should include information about the recipients, their experiences, and their motivation for participating in charging and refilling infrastructure incentive projects. The recipient also needs needs to do the following: develop a plan to implement internal control processes and documentation standards, minimize errors, fraud, waste, and abuse. Develop processes and procedures to issue incentive payments to projects within 15 working days of receiving a valid and complete incentive funds request. And develop processes and procedures to allow interested third parties in the CEC to provide funding for charging and hydrogen refueling infrastructure incentive projects within 30 calendar days of the request. The recipient must also establish, maintain, and submit incentive project records to the CEC, including but not limited to financial records, incentive payment documentation, any problems or issues experienced, and how such problems or issues were resolved. Also, the project must establish accounts and implement procedures to separately accept, track, disperse, and report them from sources outside the CEC. This proposed solicitation uses a competitive grant application process. Applicants must first pass all of the administrative and technical screening criteria. They then must achieve a score of at least 70%, which is at least 112 points out of 160 points on the evaluation criteria to be considered for funding. I'll go over the criteria in my next slide. The score achieved will be the average of the combined scores of all evaluation committee members. All applications will be ranked by their final overall scores, but only one application will be recommended for funding. And here's the scoring criteria that we'll be using. As you can see, we'll be using the criteria of team resources, qualifications, and experience, implementation and technical readiness, budget, and innovation. For team resources, qualifications, and experience, we'll be looking at the degree to which the applicant's team qualifications are suitable for the scope work task, the ability of the team to meet timelines, and the experience and knowledge the team has in infrastructure incentive projects, outreach, and other requirements of the solicitation. For implementation and technical readiness, we'll be looking at how the project team will development and implementation of the project, how it will collect and track data, internal controls that the team plans to use, how the team will track funds, how the team will manage multiple sources of funding, how it will adhere to project requirements, how it will identify and resolve problems, and how it will collect and analyze recipient feedback. For budget, we'll be focused on how the applicant team minimizes administrative costs, addresses risk and contingencies, and ensures that additional sources of funds are committed from the team or other organizations. As for innovation, we'll be looking at how the project team's approach identifies unique and innovative elements that enhance successful implementation of incentive projects, and the team's response to the hypothetical assignment. There are 40 total points for team resources, qualification, experience, 50 points for implementation and technical readiness, 40 points for budget, and 30 points for implementation, for total possible points of 160. After the scoring is complete, all the results will be released through a published notice of proposed awards, otherwise known as the NOPA. Once the NOPA is released, the Energy Commission will finalize the agreement documents and present the agreement at a business meeting for approval. Here's a tentative schedule for this proposed solicitation. Please note that we're not accepting applications at this time. As you can see today, we are having the pre-solicitation workshop, and we're aiming to release the solicitation in June. We're aiming to have the deadline to submit applications in August. We're then hoping to have the NOPA released in October. We're then aiming to have the business meeting in December, and we're aiming to have agreements executed in January 2021. And we'll be having another workshop on April 10th from 10 a.m. to noon. It'll be a staff workshop via webinar on a draft solicitation concept for zero-emission transit fleet infrastructure deployment. The CEC also uses list servers to announce and distribute information on topics, including programs, projects, and workshops. You can subscribe to the transportation energy list servers on the CEC website, and of our transportation energy list, and the link to the list servers is listed on this slide. And we welcome your feedback on our solicitation. As such, we have a discussion questions that we're seeking feedback on. what's missing from this concept that she included. Please input your feedback or any questions you have into the chat box, and we'll respond to your feedback at the end of the presentation. If you'd like to comment on our solicitations, you can via the webpage listed on this slide. You can also email our docket unit at docket@energy.ca.gov. When you do comment, please reference the docket number 19-TRAN-02. And please also reference blueprints for MD/HD Zebs and Zeb infrastructure, or block grant for MD/HD Zeb infrastructure. All comments are due by 5 p.m. on Thursday, April 16th, 2020. If you'd like to contact Katie or myself, you can via the information located on this slide. Katie can be reached at katie.herder@energy.ca.gov, and I can be reached at alexander.wan@energy.ca.gov. And now we're at the questions and answers section of our workshop. Again, you're welcome to send your questions or comments and feedback via the WebEx chat box. And again, we'll address them at the end of our presentation, which is coming up shortly. And again, if you'd like to comment on our solicitation, you can via the links on this slide. And thank you very much. We're looking forward to your feedback.
Thank you, Alex. This is Esther Odufua, and I have a lot of comments in the chat box. So first of all, I will start with a question from Fuel Cell Partnership, Nico. Does the first come, first serve program have any allowance for balance of project scope, small fleet versus the huge network study, or technology balance? That's battery electric versus fuel cell. That's from Nico, Fuel Cell Partnership. Elizabeth.
Hi Esther, good morning. My name is Elizabeth John and I'm manager of the Advanced Fuels and Vehicle Technologies Office. I'm sorry, Esther, could you maybe chat me that question? I don't know that I fully understood it.
Okay, let's see. So while I do that, we'll take another.
While we do that, would you like me to walk through the questions that were submitted in the Q&A box?
Yes, please.
Okay. So we did receive some questions in the Q&A box, which I will go through. And so the first question is is from Meredith Alexander, asking about unmuting participants at any point during the meeting for public comment. So to keep some consistency in this portion of the workshop, we are going to read all the questions submitted in the chat box. So if you have a question, please use the chat box. Don't use the Q&A box, but use the chat box. And at the end of the workshop, we will attempt to unmute people to be able to give public comment by phone. But for right now, we are going to read all the questions in the chat box first. The second question, also from Meredith, the WebEx isn't showing the attendees. Can you change these settings? So we will be posting a list of the attendees of the workshop following today's webinar. So we will post that for all to view, as well as the presentation slides. We have a question from Manal Yamut. What programs are available for light duty fleets? Is it possible to include them in this effort? So we do, under our Clean Transportation Program at the California Energy Commission, we have multiple funding categories, including a light duty section. So for electric vehicles, we have a program called Cali VIP, and then we also have a hydrogen refueling funding category, and we're happy to provide you more information about light duty opportunities following this workshop. And then we have some questions from Jamie Levin. The first is, can a blueprint plan be for a specific project, a single station project, or are you expecting plans to encompass multiple regional projects? And I think the answer is both. We will accept both single station fleet projects and multiple regional projects, a regional plan. So there are a number of criteria we've laid out that as long as that plan meets those criteria, the project would be eligible. There's another question from Jamie. Do nonprofits qualify as an eligible applicant? I'm not sure which concept this is discussing, but I'm looking real quick. So both concepts are both of these two concepts, the blueprint and the block grant, are open to nonprofits. So the blueprint is open to all public and private entities, and as long as they have a business presence in California. And the block grant concept is open to not-for-profit technology entities. Okay, another question from Jamie. Must these blueprint plans be specific to vehicle types, i.e. trucks, off-road vehicles, and/or buses? No, but the focus is on medium-duty and heavy-duty vehicle. ZEV fleets, zero-emission vehicle fleets, and zero-emission vehicle infrastructure. We've specified class 3 through 8 vehicles. Okay, another question. Carb will soon have available a GFO specific to class 8 drayage projects. Will the timing of this proposed GFO enable applicants to apply a blueprint plan that would feature vehicles funded under Carb's expected GFO? So, I don't know if someone can bring up the slide of our proposed funding.
Sure.
We are working to coordinate with Carb on a number of efforts, including their drayage projects. So it is expected that a joint effort occur in the near future with Carb regarding drayage. That's our hope, and the timing could fit well, or there could be some overlap. We're working through the timing of these various funding efforts. And then the last question from Jamie is there's two more from Jamie. How does CEC intend to coordinate the block grant program with Carb vehicle solicitations? It is our intent to coordinate closely with Carb. We at CEC have been focusing on infrastructures to support medium and heavy duty zero emission vehicles, and I think there's a good fit for partnering with Carb in those efforts. So we're always looking for ways to coordinate, and we're keeping in close communication. And then one more from Jamie. Can the administrator of the block grant program also be eligible to receive funding to implement infrastructure projects? This is something that I don't know the answer to, but we will take into consideration too and clarify in the solicitation. And there's a question from Kevin McGay. He says, a blueprint is not completely clear. Can you provide examples of eligible projects? So when we say blueprint, we are meaning that the resulting deliverable of the project will be a planning document that basically rolls out the implementation of zero emission vehicle infrastructure for for conversion of a fleet or a larger region to zero emission vehicles. We do have some examples that we can provide you. The Port of Long Beach did a blueprint. That's a good example. And then we have a number of regional readiness plans that the Clean Transportation Program has funded, so we're happy to share those. We have a question from Jordan Truitt. For the block grant, are there any criteria to evenly distribute funds to each Zeb technology, fuel cell and battery? So the intent of the block grant is that an administrator would develop the projects that come out of that funding, and so we're welcome to take comments, and we encourage you to submit comments to our docket to provide input to our solicitation concepts. We have another question from Jamie Levin. Will infrastructure funding under the block grant program also include facility upgrades to maintenance facilities to safely work on hydrogen-fueled vehicles? Again, if that's not clear and you would like that included in the concept, I encourage you to submit comments to our docket. Then we have a question from Philip Gibbons. For the EV blueprint, how do you envision the integration into an educational program such as at community colleges? So I think this was an important piece of what is included in the blueprint, and the applicant would have to show us how they would do that. Then I have a question from Tim Sassine. The block grant concept is also great. Ideally, the grant would achieve a near equal number of charging and hydrogen applications and limit award maximums up to $10 million. Thank you. We will take that comment and review as we develop these solicitations. And then I have two questions from Francesca Wall. The first, how many blueprints do you expect to fund under this program? 15 if capped at 200K and 3 million. So based on the current proposed funding amount, if all applicants requested the full amount of funding of $200,000, then yes, we would expect 15 blueprints to result. And then her second question, how long will the Mdhd block grant exist? Program details, are those totally up to the discretion of the program administrator? How will they be evaluated with stakeholders? Our intent with the block grant is to assess the need. We do understand that programs, for example, like HVIP under Carb, no longer offer infrastructure funding. And our intent is to partner very closely to allow those vehicles that are being funded by Carb to also be eligible for infrastructure. So we've left the funding amount open-ended to really evaluate what the need is. And those are all the questions in the Q&A.
So, Elizabeth, I sent you more questions. You see?
Okay, I see them. So we have a question from Nico at the California Fuel Cell Partnership. Does a first come, first served program have any allowance for balance of project scope, small fleet versus huge network study, or technology balance, battery electric vehicle versus fuel cell electric vehicle? So at this point, we don't have this included, but we really appreciate feedback. So if this is something of interest and need, we appreciate you submitting comments to our docket so that we can evaluate those comments as we develop these solicitations. And so we have, and then a second question from Abdul Rahim Brown. Will equal weight be given for hydrogen and plug-in electric infrastructure? This seems to be a common question, so if you have input, we value this input. Please submit to our docket. think those are all the questions, Esther.
Yes, those are all the questions, but I do have somebody on the phone, Lana Langdon. I don't think they are on the phone. They are not able to use the chat box. So maybe I'll go ahead and open the line for Alana.
Good morning. This is Alana Langdon with Nikola Motor Company. Good morning.
Good morning.
Morning.
Quick question. I was reading through the draft solicitation and was wondering, will private companies who have a significant customer base in California be eligible for this funding, or do we have to be actually based in California to be eligible?
We do ask that applicants have a business presence in California. And so that really, I think it depends on your application, but it is a requirement that applicants have a business presence in California. And we do have some additional language in our draft concepts regarding what that means and how to register with the Secretary of State's office.
Okay, so yeah, I think for us to be able to understand what business presence means, because our headquarters is outside of California, but we will be having robust operations in California with respect to the customers that we serve, as well as placing infrastructure operations there. So I think having some level of flexibility on what that means, business presence, that would be really great.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I also have Matthew Forrest on the phone. So, Matthew?
Yes, hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes, hello. I'm interested in knowing if the, you look at my question here, will the scoring take into account the effectiveness of the state investment, such as the dollar per vehicle fueled per day, or perhaps the dollar per kilowatt dispensed per day? Thank you.
Thank you for your question. Under the Clean Transportation Rules of AB 8, we are required to assess the cost effectiveness of projects, and we typically assess that by greenhouse gas emission reduction. But if there are other criteria you think would be good to measure, then we absolutely welcome that feedback. And if you could submit that comment in writing, we would be happy to evaluate that. And then to the previous caller who asked about business presence in California, if you could also submit that question in writing, we can evaluate it more fully and better incorporate into our solicitation.
Thanks, Matthew. So I have Larry Rilera. Larry? So Larry is not there again. And I have Gilles Petifo. Gilles? Okay, go ahead.
I have two questions in the chat or in the Q&A.
Okay, go ahead.
One person named Sass Perez said that there's a question in the chat. Could you check?
Okay, let's see.
And then I have a question from Lisa McGee. It says, can you explain the amount per project, and does any amount include the vehicles, for example, if there was wireless? I'm not 100% sure of what this question means, so if you could send us a comment about to our docket about what you're asking, that would be helpful. Thank you. Oh, I actually have a lot of questions, Esther.
Okay.
Okay, so the question from Sass Perez is, can we do blueprint first and then project second for grant requests? We'll be on time for the project grant request. So I think that that would be great. Putting together a blueprint first and then later asking for funding for infrastructure and vehicles through Carb makes sense, and you're absolutely welcome to apply for funding in that order. I have a question from Matthew Forrest. This one was the one that was said, I believe, on the phone. So the question was, will scoring take into account the effectiveness of the state investment, such as the dollar per customer served per day or the dollar per kilowatt hour dispensed per day? And I did advise that comments and suggestions be submitted in writing for us to evaluate. Gilles Pettifor asks, do awardees of the block grant have to distribute funds to other entities, or can they utilize the award to fund their own projects? The intent of the block grant is to distribute funds to other entities and to develop a program to administer those funds. We have a question from Christian Corby. Will projects that provide charging infrastructure for hybrid Mdhd vehicles also be eligible for the blueprint and block grant? At this time, we are proposing to fund zero emission vehicles. So 100% battery electric or fuel cell electric. If you have comments, though, that you would like us to consider, please submit to our docket. And then I have a question from Joanne Golden. For the blueprint, will additional points be awarded for projects that come in with match funding? At this time, we do not have that listed as a criteria, but again, we're welcome to take comments if this is something we should consider. And then the last question I have is from Michelle Kinman. Adding my question here, as it doesn't seem to have made it to the chat box. For the block grant, are you seeking one entity that will cover projects statewide, or would you consider an application that is focused on projects in one region? So the intent is that there would be one entity that covers projects statewide. However, those projects could be divided into projects that cover certain regions. So, but if you have a comment to that or would like to make a suggestion, we're happy to consider that in our docket. Actually, I have a couple more. So this question is from Meredith Alexander. $3 million is far too low for a statewide program. We've seen programs in states much smaller than California with twice the budget. Funding should be doubled at a minimum and are wrapped into the block grant program. These are complementary to infrastructure incentives. I believe this is in response to the blueprint. We are happy to take this comment into consideration. And then also, Esther, there have been comments sent into the chat box.
So I've forwarded some to you.
Okay.
Okay, so there is a comment from Alicia Guild from CalStat. He said, are you saying only one project wins $50 million US?
So again, the intent of the block grant is for the recipient to release a program that would fund $50 million worth of projects for infrastructure. So the awardee of the block grant would then determine how those funds would be administered.
Then there's a comment from a question from Jamie Levin on the block grants. Do I understand that only non-profits are eligible? That seems like a very narrow group of eligible agencies and not ones necessarily experienced in infrastructure projects, not agencies that operate zero emission vehicles.
And that was for the block grant?
Yes.
Yeah, so I believe this is a legislative requirement of our program. And so specifically for this block grant, the eligible applicants listed are not-for-profit technology entities. But again, this is for the recipient of the block grant who would then release funding within projects to fund zero-emission vehicle infrastructure.
Okay. Then from the Fuel Cell Partnership, Nico, for block grants, in addition or instead of not-for-profits, how could regional air districts serve as administrators for block grant funds and solicitations?
Sorry, can you say that again?
Okay, so for in addition or instead of not-for-profits, how could regional air districts serve as administrators for block grant funds and solicitations? That's regarding the regional air districts and how they can administer the block grant.
Okay, so as I said, I believe this is a legislative requirement of our program, but again, please submit your comment in writing and we can evaluate it further.
Okay, question from Dave Edward. What is the link to HVIP or other vehicle orders? No funds should be spent that are not directly linked to vehicles. So these are all questions regarding HVIP and vehicle.
So the question is, are we funding vehicles? Sorry, was that the question?
So you said, what's the link to HVIP or other vehicle orders? So that's the first question.
So our intent is to closely partner with these programs, whether it be a direct partnership or lining up timelines. So we are actively coordinating with Carb because we do understand they have funding for vehicles, we have funding for infrastructure. We want to pair the two together. So where we can, we are actively coordinating, speaking regularly and lining up our programs the best we can to ensure that those getting vehicles also have the opportunity to apply for infrastructure funding.
And we have a question from Manal Yamut. He said, is there a schedule for the block grant GFO release and due dates? And I believe we have the slide up there, but you can still speak to that.
Yeah, so I would just point to the slide. Again, all these dates are tentative. We are trying to work through, working remotely and conducting webinars online. These schedules are tentative, but it's our hope that we will be able to have a solicitation released in the June time period.
Then we have a question from Lisa McGee. Are the block grants for public and or private infrastructure?
I believe the intent is for both. And again, the block grant, the solicitation is to fund a block grant recipient. And then at that point, the block grant recipient would develop projects that fund zero emission vehicle infrastructure, which would include both public and private.
Next from Kevin Magay. Do awardees of the block grants have to distribute funds to other entities, or can they utilize the award to fund their own projects?
I think I answered that question. So yes, it would be to fund other entities. But again, if you would like to submit this in writing, we can clarify the intent in the solicitation.
Okay. From the Fuel Cell Partnership, for blueprints, what is CEC's perspective on local versus regional? In the presentation, it is not clear which has stronger emphasis.
I think we are looking at both. And so as long as you are meeting the requirements of the solicitation and working towards zero emission vehicle fleet conversion, we are looking at both.
Then from James Javelosa, for the block grant, are there any criteria to evenly distribute funds to each Zebs technology, that means fuel cell versus battery?
So I think we've gotten a lot of questions regarding that, and we'll definitely take that into consideration when we go back and look through all the comments.
Next from Kelly Ross, still regarding the block grant, can a public or private entity partner with a non-profit to be an eligible applicant?
For which one, the block grant?
Yes, the block grant.
As it's written, I don't see that there's any restrictions on partnerships, just on eligible applicants. So we can look into that further, but I think that would be fine.
Yeah, let's see. Okay, let me quickly go through the chat. Okay, this is from Mark Richardson. Can you explain the amount per project? And does any amount include the vehicles, for example, if there was wireless?
Oh, I think I read that question already.
Okay. Okay.
I didn't fully understand it, but I would answer that no vehicles will not be eligible for funding under either of these concepts. And the blueprint is intended as a planning grant, so there would be no equipment funded. And the block grant is intended to eventually result in funding for infrastructure, but the block grant solicitation itself is for the award of a block grant recipient.
Then we have Al Kiofi. Can you clarify who will be considered an eligible applicant? Specifically, will the public school system be able to apply for funds for charging infrastructure to support electric school buses?
If we're talking about the block grant, which I think we are, the structure of the program itself has not been developed. The intent of the solicitation is to solicit a block grant recipient who would then develop projects that would fund zero emission vehicle infrastructure. So there are a number of ways that could be structured, and at this time we don't know what that looks like.
Next from Jamie Levin, are the regional Aqmds eligible to apply for block grant funding?
So we have talked about how the eligible applicants are not-for-profit technology entities located in California. We've also discussed partnerships. There could perhaps be partnerships. And I think that a few people have asked this, so if there are comments to it that can be submitted to our docket, we can fully evaluate the request.
Okay, next from somebody. Will infrastructure funding under the block grant program also include facility upgrades to maintenance facilities to safely work on hydrogen-fueled vehicles?
I think that question was from Jamie, and I did ask that if that's not clear, to submit a comment in writing.
Okay, good. Okay. We've answered most of the questions.
I have a few more.
Okay, if you have more.
So I have a question from Alana Langdon. What are the restrictions on eligible applicants? And for the blueprints, there are no restrictions. All public and private entities are eligible to apply. And they would have to also meet the eligible project requirements. So if you look through the concept document, it will explain what an eligible project is. But that solicitation is open to all public and private entities. The block grant is open to all not-for-profit technology entities located in California.
Then a question from Michelle Kimman. Can we do blueprint first and then project second for grant requests? Will this be on time?
So I think there's a great opportunity for that. I don't know how well the timing will line up, but I think that depends on the length of time it takes to complete a blueprint, but I definitely see that as a great opportunity.
I'm not sure if you have answered the question, but for the block grant, are you seeking one entity that will cover projects statewide, or will you consider an application that is focused on projects in one region?
I think I did answer that question. So the intent is for the recipient to cover a project statewide, but projects themselves could be divided regionally.
Okay. And this is from Alicia Glid. You are proposing a separate funding solicitation for transit infrastructure. Will the timing of that GFO allow an applicant to seek funding under the Blueprint GFO to prepare a transit application?
So we are proposing to have a workshop for transit next Friday, April 10th. And the intent is to release that solicitation in the near future. I don't know if you could pull up that slide again. So I don't think that the timing would line up necessarily for that transit solicitation, but the opportunity may line up for future funding.
And we have a long comment submitted by CalStat. I guess we will address that because there are so many comments. Maybe through the Q&A, actually, let me forward that to Elizabeth. It's a long one.
Okay, would CalStat start like to read the comment into the phone? Maybe you could.
Let's see, let me see. Alicia, is she there? No. Okay, yes, let me go. Alicia Guild, can you go ahead? Alicia?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
Oh, hi. Yes, sorry, I know it's a long comment, and thank you so much for the opportunity. So wanted to share our thoughts on both the blueprint and block grant. First of all, you guys did a really nice job of developing these draft solicitation and really appreciate all the good and hard work that you put into it. Something that we just wanted to acknowledge that we believe we've been sharing with you all is just the absolute critical need for technical assistance grants for fleets, especially fleets that are going to be needing infrastructure assistance as they're deploying their zero-emission vehicle technologies. And yes, we're speaking from our experience of working on the HVIP program and understanding how many fleets are committing to vehicles and the need that they will have to take the steps in order to appropriately conduct their site assessments and move forward with their technical analysis to develop their site plans for infrastructure development. So there's definitely a needed resource for the actual systems to be able to conduct and develop those plans, as well as to support infrastructure development. So we were thinking that, you know, it would be good to consider the idea of including technical assistance planning grants within a block grant. I understand that the blueprints are a bit more broad in terms of the eligible applicants, but we do see an immediate need from fleets that are needing that technical assistance. So where there might be consideration, whether the blueprint grant be combined with a block grant, or whether the block grant would include incentives to support with actual technical assistance where fleets are needing that planning assistance. So that's just one general comment. Definitely think that the resources that are being proposed need to be in a way in which they can be expedited and moved forward as expeditiously as possible in terms of developing a very seamless and continuous program, especially for the block grant, where we can be moving forward incentives to help fleets deploy those technologies as quickly as possible, as well as with the planning assistance grants. We understand the timing of solicitations and responding to those applicants that have applied and the time in which to get resources to actually move forward with planning for fleets that are going to be moving toward their zero emission fleet goals. Being able to tap into those resources as quickly as possible is absolutely critical. I'm summarizing my points that I put into the comment the chat box. So also just looking at from a perspective for the block grant, just making sure that it's statewide, that it's not broken into segments. Again, looking at how this does complement the HPIP program, and really appreciate that that is definitely something that's being considered along with other vehicle incentive programs that are advancing zero emission technologies. You know, where there might be good synergy to complement the investor-owned utilities and their make-ready incentive programs, and to the degree that the IOUs have incentives for EVSE rebates, looking at how there might be opportunities to leverage those resources so that we can extend those public dollars as far as possible. And where there's opportunities for stacking those resources as well. And again, this is specifically talking to the block grant. And hopefully Esther and Elizabeth that covered a good summary of the comments that I put into the chat box.
Thanks so much, Alicia. We will make sure to copy those comments in the chat box, and then if you want to submit them to the docket as well, we're very happy to review more closely, but we appreciate those comments.
Thank you.
Thanks, Alicia. So I have more comments in the chat box from Dave Edwards. How will workforce development investment, including job skills training costs, be accounted for or identified within the grant solicitation?
So we've outlined a number of criteria for the block grant to cover, and I believe that was one of them. But if it's not clear and you feel that there should be some additional information required, please submit that in writing, and we'd be happy to consider that and try to incorporate it.
Okay, thank you. Next, I have, what is the duration of award to develop the blueprints? Is it 6 months, 12 months, or more than 12 months? And that's from Cabin Mosa.
Okay, I don't remember if there was a time period, but if you have a comment to what you believe that should be, we're happy to take that comment. We do have essentially funding deadlines, but we do have multiple years on these funds. So I believe there's 2 more years to encumber and then 4 more years for liquidation of the funds, so essentially 6 years. So if you have a comment to what that time period should look like, we're happy to take that comment.
Next, for the block grant, are off-grid projects eligible? For instance, DC fast EV chargers plus solar plus energy storage.
I think that the solicitation itself will be for the award of a block grant recipient, and that block grant recipient would determine how the projects within that program are funded and what is eligible. So I don't know at this time.
Okay, from Stephen Ellis. EV infrastructure is typically designed only after consultation with the local utility, as their existing infrastructure determines the scope of upgrades needed. How does this fit with the proposed blueprint?
I think that they would fit well together. We would actually appreciate that comment in writing so we can properly incorporate that into the solicitation.
Okay, and next we have, from lessons learned in the past, please be careful putting all block grant funding into one bucket. Setting up a fight between the two Zebs technologies, BEV and fuel cell, I suggest initially setting up as 50-50 and then assess one project proposals are in.
Okay, thank you.
Then Next, will the block grant awardees have a requirement or expectation to balance funding across applications and technologies? For example, on-road versus off-road technology.
This was for the block grant, is that what you said?
Yes, for the block grant.
Okay, so so I think the actual requirements of what and eligibility of projects will be determined by the awardee of the block grant. So that is still to be determined.
Yeah. Then next from Nico, can you please describe your vision of how the EV blueprint should be integrated into an educational program such as community colleges?
I don't know that I can describe my vision, but I think the applicant should be able to do that. And it should be part of the blueprint to truly understand what that looks like. And I think we have some examples of various blueprints that we can share if listeners are interested.
Then this is also from Jamie Levin. For interested applicants who are already covered by a completed Mdhd EV blueprint, can this additional blueprint funding be utilized for in-depth electrical infrastructure planning and analysis?
So as long as the funding builds upon and doesn't duplicate already funded planning efforts, then it would be eligible.
So, and we have comment from CalStat. Seems to be a long one too. I don't know if we have CalStat representative on the phone. It's a long one. I know that should also be submitted to the docket. So I'm not sure who is from CalStat. So James, I think James Dumont.
It's from Momentum.
No, from CalStat. That says from
CalStat was Alicia. She might have already said her comments, but if you wanted to give another comment, Alicia, maybe reach out to Esther in the chat box.
Yeah, okay.
I do have a question from Alana Langdon. Okay. She says, does the block grant funding requirement include inclusion of infrastructure projects that positively impact grid operations and load management with clean energy sources, i.e. hydrogen? So I think all of this could be evaluated in the block grant and resulting projects from the block grant.
Then I have a comment here. It says, we will encourage the Energy Commission to provide additional consideration for medium-duty, heavy-duty blueprints applicants that are offering match share to the project. This will be in alignment with the CEC's recent RFI 20 Finance 01, which is strategies to attract private investment in zero-emission vehicles, charging infrastructure, and other clean transportation program.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, let's see, keep going. Almost there. Okay, I think most of these have been answered. Okay, question from somebody. Does charge and load management solution qualify as infrastructure? I think that's from Jamie Levin.
So when we talk more about our solicitation concepts, probably next Friday, when we discuss more funding for actual infrastructure, we can discuss what that includes. Under the block grant and blueprint, so for the blueprint, these are planning grants, and I think those technologies should be included if they're part of the planning. And under the block grant, I think that's still to be determined.
Okay, I have Tim Sassin on the phone. I'm going to unmute you. Tim, go ahead. Tim Sassin. Okay. I'll go next to Sas Perez. Sas Perez. Sas Perez. Okay, nope.
So I did get a comment from Nico Camp, and he said that he didn't ask the question about the community colleges, and so perhaps feedback is being attributed to the wrong people in the chat box.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, so let me go ahead and give him that opportunity. Nico, go ahead.
Let's see, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
I was just mentioning that it appears that questions are being attributed to folks that didn't ask the question, so I'm not sure, so you may want to not attribute it to people asking a question in some cases, because it appears there's some confusion. But one question I had with regards to the balance of BEV versus fuel cell vehicle technology, it keeps coming up, but there's a bit of a concern there, and it would be great if CEC could take this in consideration in both solicitations and making sure that both technologies are covered, whatever matter you deem best. But it's important because this is all moving towards the ZEV goal, to achieving the ZEV goals for the state, and one technology may be useful for one vehicle category, but it may not be so useful for other vehicle categories, or there are different levels of development, even though I know we're talking about infrastructure here. And I like the comment about making sure that the state is covered, but then again, it would be good to focus on certain areas as well, so it's not being spread too thinly, and that's the risk you're taking here as well. So that's more towards my point made earlier. Yeah, I'll leave it with that, but I'm looking forward to getting to the point of seeing the solicitation, because right now for the block grant we're really talking about the administrator, not so much about what happens next. That will have its own process, I expect at some point. Thank you.
Thanks, Nico.
Thank you. Yes, and if anyone has suggestions on what that, we're hearing that there should be a split between BEV and fuel cell funding. So if anyone has suggestions on what that looks like, we are happy to take this into consideration as well.
Next, I have Kristen Kobe. Kristen. Then I move to Joan Golden. Joan?
I think mine was already attributed to me.
Joan?
I think we answered her question.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, you've already answered my question.
Okay, good. Okay. Francisca Wall. Francisca?
You answered my question.
Okay, and Corbin Mossa. Corbin? Okay, so with that, I don't know, Elizabeth, if you have any other questions forwarded to you. I've gone through most of the questions.
I don't see any additional questions in the Q&A. Maybe Alex, you could bring up the slide again. Actually, sorry, it looks like Jamie Levin and Meredith Alexander would like to make comments on the phone, so maybe you could unmute them one at a time.
Okay, so I'll go ahead and unmute Jamie Levin.
Thank you, Esther. I'll follow up on a couple of other comments that I think are important. But first, administratively, some of the questions that have been attributed to me were not asked by me. I'm sure with all the exchange going on, it's easy to confuse that. But I wanted to make an important comment, and this really follows on what CalSTART also said, that introducing these new technologies in fleet applications where fleets don't yet have the experience of both specifying equipment, designing equipment, and deploying equipment, both the vehicles and the infrastructure. Project management support is absolutely critical. I mean, we've been engaged in some very big projects in that very same capacity. And so I think it's extremely important, and I will follow up with this in our letter to you, that you need to make provisions for that capability to assist the fleet operators in making these transitions. That's separate and apart from developing a blueprint. It's actually in deployment. The other comment I wanted to make is the timing of what you're pulling together here. Carb has their funding. I did ask a question previously about forthcoming GFO for drayage trucks. The timing of infrastructure funding to match what Carb is offering, because Carb has made it clear that they're looking to CEC to provide funding. If you do not time this together, then we're really working at cross purposes. We're not leveraging the funds that need to be addressed. And lastly, about the split between fuel cell and battery, I think you need to very clearly look at performance metrics in terms of how these two technologies address the market demand. That relates to a number of performance factors in terms of range, payload, weight differences that are critical to using your funds correctly. And with that, I'll leave it, except I will be sending in a letter with these additional comments. Oh, one other thing, and I did state this in a chat note, you've got, in the case of hydrogen, you've got to include funding for infrastructure upgrades so that you can safely work on hydrogen-fueled vehicles in maintenance facilities operated by fleets. Thank you.
Esther, following Meredith, we also would have a comment from Stephen Ellis. So following, first open Meredith's line and then Stephen Ellis's.
Okay. Here you go, Meredith.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Great. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much. I just thought I could try to tie a few loose threads together, and apologies, this is Meredith Alexander from CalSTART. If I had known we might be unmuted at some point, we could have saved a few of our questions. But I just had one question about the blueprint, which is that this is part of the medium and heavy duty solicitation, and it's discussed that they're supporting fleets, but then it also implies that this is about community planning, and the Long Beach example was definitely much broader than planning for a fleet. So if you want to speak to this now, great, but it's just, we would appreciate further clarification as to whether these are really intended for fleets to do planning for their vehicle needs, or if you are suggesting that it's broader for a community. And if it is for a community, we would suggest that it potentially be part of that it not be part of the medium and heavy duty solicitation, because that does seem like a very different focus. So I can pause there if you want to answer it. I did have just one other point.
Sure. I think in our workshop in October, we heard both a need for fleets and for greater regional planning efforts. And I think the intent really is medium duty and heavy duty. So whether that be planning for corridors or planning for larger regions where fleets are working together. So if there is a way where that can be more clear, or if perhaps that is not what is the need, then we would appreciate that feedback and are happy to take that as we put together the solicitation.
As we have worked on regional corridor planning, that is extremely important, but we would say that is also much more comprehensive and could encompass the entire budget for this solicitation. And so we would suggest that you probably try to focus on fleets here and now, where we know there's an immediate critical need and potentially develop a separate solicitation for a regional planning effort. Because for fleets, we think 150,000 could be sufficient. We still don't think that the 3 million would allow you to meet the demand for the fleets that exist now. But, you know, again, a community-wide plan would require much more funding potentially than a fleet. And then just on the block grant concept, I wanted to make sure that we made this point clear that we do not think that this program should be broken into regional components and also that it be continuous and multi-year. I know you've also already received a few questions about the 50 million and what happens when that's done, but also that this funding be complementary to IOU funds and stackable with other funding sources, and that it also covers software, which I think others have made those points as well. So thank you again for the opportunity to tie our comments together.
Thank you.
Thank you, Meredith. Okay. So, who's next?
Stephen Ellis.
Okay. Go ahead, Stephen.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great, thanks. Hey, so good morning and thank you for all the hard work and good work toward this project and these programs. I did provide a couple of comments. I also, like Nico mentioned, was attributed to the wrong comment. So I ask you to go back and look at this so that the record gets corrected there. A couple of comments on this is that, you know, from the block grant item number 6, my view is that it would be inappropriate to award, you know, one lump sum, if that's your intention, to a single technology approach. At this early stage, when the state is seeking to assess the role of both plug-in or battery electric and fuel cell in these applications. So there was a question about, you had said you were open to ideas of how these things could be done. Certainly in, from lessons in the past, where there has been kind of a single pot, but both Zebs technologies making applications, it does set them up for a fight between the two. And one strategy that you could consider is certainly what Jamie mentioned, but also just to initially suggest that you would set this up as 50-50 split between the two technologies, and then look at those proposals and projects and assess at that assess at that point in time. Otherwise, it has the appearance of kind of, as was mentioned earlier, winner take all. And then last, I would just ask that any of the heavy and medium duty funding not have any impact on light duty funding for whether it's vehicles and or infrastructure projects. That's critical. We know that in some extreme cases, rare cases, a heavy duty infrastructure can be set up to serve light duty vehicles, but they never really are compatible in the market. So it could serve as a connector or a destination, but not in market. So it would guarantee that the light duty would be harmed even if that money was shifted over to heavy duty. So those are my comments. I appreciate the opportunity to participate.
Thank you.
Thank you. It looks like we have another question from Nico. With regards to Mdhd vehicle classes, would CEC consider expanding the vehicle class categories to include Class 2B? This would align with Carb's classification under the Advanced Clean Truck Rule, which is under development, which covers Class 2B 8. I think happy to take that into consideration if you'd like to submit that in writing to our docket.
Any other?
Are there any other questions? Either chat to Esther in the chat box. I'm also looking at the Q&A box as they come in.
I'm checking quickly. Let's see. we have any other public comment.
Alex, could you bring up the docket slide one more time?
Sure. This one?
Yes, thank you. Bless you. I don't see any other questions. Esther, do you?
Yeah, I'm just checking in case we have any question from anybody on the line. I have over 160 people on the call. I don't seem to see. We already, Alana, we're already going down. No question.
So we've pulled up the slide again on how to submit comments. We really encourage comments and value all of your input. So here is a link to the e-filing comment system. We would like comments by April 16th at 5 o'clock. That will assist us as we develop these solicitations and try to get them out within the timeline we projected. So I'll leave that up for a minute. I did get another question. So the question is, are you considering funding Concept 6 from funds currently available at the exclusion of the other concepts other than Concept 3? So we did put up a funding chart earlier where we said that Concept 6 is actually contingent upon adoption of our current investment plan as well as future funding appropriations. And so no, the intent is not to, the intent is to fund all of the concepts listed on the slide we put up earlier with the chart of the 6 concepts.
And I have something from, I believe, I'm looking at it properly, Mark Richardson. Says, I believe the non-profit awardees should be encouraged to focus heavily on charging infrastructure for California's public schools and their emerging electric school bus fleets. I don't know if that's a comment or a question.
Okay, thank you. I think that's a comment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then from Mark Richardson, that's still the same comment.
So I have a question. Did we miss the sign up for the April 10th event?
Yes.
So no, absolutely. We encourage all those on the call today to participate in our April 10th webinar. You can sign on similar to as you did today. You can either go through our Energy Commission website or you can use the webinar notice. If you have questions, we're happy to send you that information for how you can attend, but there is no sign up necessary. And yes, we encourage all to attend our April 10th webinar.
Then there's a comment from Meredith. It said, regarding submitting this question, because it was skipped, the blueprints, it is confusing whether these are intended for fleets or community planning. I think we already addressed.
Yeah, so we
already addressed that. Okay. Yeah.
Okay, I have one more question from Tim Sassine. With a variety of scale possible for the blueprint concepts, will there be awards for overlapping blueprints? For example, one for a city and one for a region encompassing that city, or for hydrogen submissions and hydrogen submissions in the same areas? I think the intent is that anything funded should be in addition to and not duplicative of. So if there's overlap, the funding cannot cover the same areas. We would probably have to look into that more to fully answer your question though. And we would have to probably see it within an application.
Yeah, I do not have any other questions right now.
I don't either. So again, I will just encourage all to submit comments or questions to our docket. The slide is up for you to view, and also encourage all to participate in our April 10th webinar. We thank you all for your participation today and really appreciate all your input and comments.
I have just this Tim Sassin.
Yes, I see his comment. To cover the overlap issue, I would recommend setting the scope at the regional or city level, given the funding amounts and utility of the output.
And I think Tim is also still on the line. It seems his line is open. Tim?
Yep, you got me. Thank you. Those
Okay.
were my written comments. Thank you very much.
Good, thank you. Okay, I think I gone through the list. Unless we have any public comment, I can unmute the line to see if there's any public comment. I believe the lines.
It's a great solution. Fantastic innovation. We are the only company in the world that has anything like it.
Okay, so that didn't work.
I think, sorry, I have one more question. Nico Bokamp writes, are you also considering the whole state of California as a region? Yes, I think that could be possible. So again, we really appreciate your time today. You know, please reach out to us if you have additional comments and questions. You can use our docket process. We're accepting comments through April 16th at 5 p.m. Here's the information again on the slide. We, again, thank you for your time today. We really appreciate your flexibility in attending this workshop remotely and working through the various technical new technology we've been working with. So we really thank you for your time. Again, if you have comments or additional questions, feel free to use our docket, and we will take those all into consideration.
Thank you.
With that, I think we will end the webinar. We'll be monitoring the question box for a few minutes, but with that, we'll end the webinar. Thank you.